If you ever agree to be someone's fake boyfriend for a wedding, make sure you're not already secretly falling for him. That was the first thought that crossed my mind as I stared at the caller ID lighting up my phone at 11:47 on a Thursday night. Lucas Carter, my older brother's best friend. The guy who somehow looked perfectly comfortable in every family photo he'd ever accidentally wandered into. The guy who remembered everyone's birthday except his own. The guy I had spent the last 2 years pretending I absolutely did not have a ridiculous crush on. I let the phone ring twice before answering. "Hey, Lucas." His voice sounded unusually tense. "Ethan, I need a favor. A big one." I laughed softly, assuming he needed help moving furniture again or wanted someone to feed his golden retriever while he traveled for work. "Depends. Does it involve lifting anything heavier than 50 pounds? It involves pretending to be my boyfriend for 3 days. Silence swallowed the room. I actually pulled my phone away from my ear to make sure I hadn't accidentally answered someone else's call. "You're kidding." I wish I was. I sat upright on my couch, suddenly very awake. Outside my apartment window, rain tapped gently against the glass while the city settled into the quiet rhythm of midnight. "Explain," I finally managed. Lucas exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "My college friend is getting married this weekend at a resort in Vermont. Everyone expects me to bring someone. If I show up alone, certain people are going to make the weekend complicated." "So you picked me?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Why?" Another pause. "Because I trust you." For simple words. Somehow they landed harder than any dramatic confession ever could. I rubbed the back of my neck, trying not to overthink them. What exactly would I have to do? Hold my hand. Smile for photos. Dance if they ask. Let people believe we've been dating for a while. Nothing that makes you uncomfortable. The minute you want out, we leave. It sounded simple enough. Temporary. Harmless. Completely manageable if my heart would agree to cooperate. "Does my brother know?" I asked. Lucas chuckled. Quietly. "He's the one who told me to call you." Of course he did. My brother had always been suspiciously observant, and now I wondered how much he'd noticed over the years. "You're really desperate," I muttered. "Very. What's in it for me?" "I'll help you with that interview at Carter Design. I know the hiring director." That made me freeze. I'd been chasing that opportunity for months. "You fight dirty," I said. "Occupational hazard." I should have said no. Any reasonably intelligent person would have. Spending an entire wedding weekend pretending to date the one man I secretly wanted to date sounded less like a favor and more like emotional self-sabotage. But I heard myself answer anyway. "Fine. I'm in." Lucas let out a relieved laugh, warm enough to make me smile despite myself. "Thank you, Ethan. I owe you." "You definitely do." We hung up a minute later, and I stared at the dark screen reflecting my own nervous expression. 3 days of pretending. 3 days of fake smiles, fake affection, and fake romance. I kept repeating the word fake like it could build a wall around my feelings. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Lucas. "There's one thing I forgot to mention." I opened it without thinking. The groom is my ex. I spent the entire drive to Vermont trying to convince myself that this weekend was just another favor between friends, but every mile made that lie a little harder to believe. Lucas was behind the wheel of his dark blue SUV, one hand resting casually on the steering wheel, while classic rock played quietly through the speakers. The mountains slowly replaced the city skyline, their early autumn colors painting the hills in deep shades of gold, crimson, and orange. Every now and then he glanced at me with a small smile, asking if I wanted coffee, if the temperature was comfortable, or if I needed to stop for a break. He had always been thoughtful in ways that never seemed forced, and somehow that only made everything more dangerous. By the time we reached the lakeside resort just after 3 in the afternoon, the parking lot was already packed with luxury SUVs, rental cars, and guests carrying garment bags toward the elegant stone lodge. The place looked like something from a travel magazine, complete with white wooden gazebos overlooking the water and rows of string lights waiting for sunset. I had barely unbuckled my seatbelt when Lucas rounded the front of the vehicle and opened my door. "Ready?" he asked. "Not even a little." He laughed softly before extending his hand. "Then we should start practicing." I stared at his hand for a second longer than I should have. Practicing? If we suddenly start acting like a couple inside, people will notice. We need to look comfortable before anyone sees us. That made perfect sense, which was unfortunate because it also made my pulse climb into completely unreasonable territory. I slipped my hand into his. His grip was warm, steady, and completely natural, as though he had done this 100 times before. We had taken maybe 10 steps toward the entrance when someone called his name. Lucas. A cheerful woman in a pale green dress hurried over and wrapped him in a hug before turning to me with a bright smile. You finally brought him. We were beginning to think you invented your mysterious boyfriend. Before I could panic, Lucas gently squeezed my hand. Claire, this is Ethan. He looked at me with an easy smile that felt almost unfair. My boyfriend. The single word echoed louder in my head than it should have. Claire practically melted. It is about time. We have heard so much about you. I forced myself to smile. Hopefully only the good parts. Only glowing reviews, she promised before hurrying off to greet another arriving guest. The moment she disappeared, I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. You really sold that, I whispered. Lucas tilted his head. So did you. We stepped into the grand lobby where polished wood beams stretched overhead and a massive stone fireplace filled the room with welcoming warmth despite the crisp mountain air outside. Couples chatted near the reception desk, while wedding planners hurried past with clipboards and flower arrangements. It seemed like everyone already knew Lucas, and every introduction followed the same pattern. Smiles. Congratulations. Curious questions. Then another effortless. This is my boyfriend, Ethan. Each time he said it, it sounded just believable enough to make my heart forget the rules. As we reached the front desk to collect our room keys, the receptionist glanced at her computer and smiled knowingly. Welcome, Mr. Carter. We have you reserved in our deluxe king suite. I blinked. Sweet. Lucas looked almost as surprised as I was. I booked 2 beds. The receptionist frowned politely while checking the reservation again. I am very sorry, but due to another wedding party extending their stay, we only have 1 suite available. It has 1 king bed. I hope that will not be a problem. Lucas looked at me, waiting for my answer, while every carefully built emotional boundary I had brought to Vermont suddenly felt much smaller than the room we were about to share. Lucas glanced at me for a long second before giving the receptionist a calm smile that somehow made the situation feel less dramatic than it did inside my head. It is fine, he said. We will make it work. I nodded a little too quickly. Yes, 1 bed is completely fine. The words came out with far more confidence than I actually felt. 5 minutes later, we stepped into the suite, and I immediately understood why every room in the resort had already been booked. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake where the afternoon sun scattered across the water like liquid gold. A stone fireplace sat opposite a sitting area with oversized leather chairs, and fresh flowers decorated a polished wooden table near the balcony doors. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It also contained exactly 1 king bed in the center of the room, covered with crisp white blankets that looked far too inviting for my own peace of mind. I dropped my overnight bag beside the dresser and cleared my throat. I can sleep on the couch. Lucas looked over at the sofa and laughed softly. You are 6'1". Your feet would hang off the end. I have survived worse. Not while pretending to be my boyfriend. If someone walks in tomorrow morning and finds you sleeping out here, our story falls apart. Unfortunately, he was right. I sighed dramatically and pointed toward the bed. Then we build a pillow border. International peace treaty style. His smile widened. Deal. The simple agreement somehow made everything easier. We unpacked in comfortable silence until a welcome basket arrived from the wedding party. Inside were local maple cookies, sparkling cider, a handwritten schedule, and matching navy blue name badges with elegant silver lettering. Lucas clipped his badge onto his jacket before handing mine over. I stared at it for a second. Ethan Brooks, guest of Lucas Carter. Underneath, someone had handwritten the words, +1. My stomach fluttered for reasons I refused to examine too closely. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Before either of us could answer, the door swung open and 3 members of the wedding party stepped inside, carrying garment bags and laughing loudly. Lucas, one of them called. We are stealing you for rehearsal in 15 minutes. Then they noticed me. One of the bridesmaids smiled so brightly I thought she might actually sparkle. You must be Ethan. We have all been dying to meet you. I smiled politely while trying not to look nervous. I hope I live up to the stories. Trust me. Another guest teased, looking directly at Lucas. He talks about you a lot more than you probably realize. I caught Lucas rubbing the back of his neck in a way I had never seen before. It almost looked like he was embarrassed. Can we not interrogate him the first day? He said with an amused groan. He just got here. Fine, the bridesmaid laughed. But you two are joining everyone for the welcome dinner on the terrace. Couples are sitting together. After they left, the room became strangely quiet. I looked at Lucas. You talk about me? His eyes widened just enough to make me wonder if I had stumbled onto something important. Your brother asks about you all the time, he answered after a brief pause. It comes up naturally. It was a reasonable explanation. Maybe too reasonable. Before I could ask another question, his phone buzzed. The relaxed expression disappeared from his face almost instantly. He read the message without saying a word, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. Everything okay? I asked. He forced a small smile that never quite reached his eyes. Yeah, just a schedule update. I believed him for exactly 3 seconds until another notification lit up the screen resting beside him on the table. The preview appeared before he could flip it over. Looking forward to finally meeting your new boyfriend. See you tonight. Signed, Ryan. I did not need Lucas to explain who Ryan was. The groom had just announced he was coming to find us first. The welcome dinner began just as the sun slipped behind the mountains, leaving the lake glowing beneath hundreds of tiny string lights stretched between tall maple trees. Round tables covered with white linen filled the terrace, and soft acoustic music drifted through the cool evening air while guests laughed over sparkling cider and carefully arranged appetizers. It looked like the kind of place where every memory became a framed photograph. I only hoped none of those memories included me making a complete fool of myself. Lucas walked beside me with an easy confidence I wished I could borrow for 5 minutes. As we approached the terrace, his fingers brushed against mine before quietly slipping into my hand. It happened so naturally that I almost forgot we were pretending until my heart reacted like it had missed an important meeting. Relax, he whispered with a smile that only I could see. Everyone is watching us because they are curious, not because they are trying to catch us. That is somehow not comforting, I muttered. His quiet laugh made the tension in my shoulders loosen just a little. We had barely reached our table when a tall man in an elegant charcoal suit turned toward us. He had neatly styled dark hair, confident posture, and the kind of smile that looked polished enough to belong in a magazine advertisement. The conversation around him softened as he walked directly toward Lucas. It has been a long time, he said. Lucas answered with a polite nod. Congratulations, Ryan. The 2 words sounded friendly enough, but something invisible settled between them like glass. Ryan's attention shifted to me almost immediately. His smile remained perfectly pleasant, yet his eyes seemed determined to study every detail. So you are Ethan, he said. I have heard quite a bit about you today. I offered my hand. Nice to meet you. Congratulations on the wedding. He shook it warmly. Thank you. I am glad Lucas finally found someone willing to put up with him. Before I could think of a reply, Lucas rested his free hand lightly against the middle of my back. The gesture was small, almost effortless, but strangely reassuring. He does more than put up with me, Lucas replied with a calm smile. He keeps me from forgetting where I parked. Ryan laughed politely, although something flickered across his expression before disappearing again. Well, I hope the 2 of you enjoy the weekend. He excused himself as another guest called his name, leaving an awkward silence behind. I waited until he disappeared into the crowd before quietly asking, was it always that formal between you? Lucas looked out across the lake instead of answering immediately. Not always. That was all he said. Dinner moved along with cheerful speeches, embarrassing childhood stories about the bride and groom, and enough laughter to make the evening feel lighter than it had any right to. Halfway through dessert, the master of ceremonies clapped his hands together with unmistakable enthusiasm. Since this weekend is all about celebrating love, he announced, we thought it would be fun to begin with our couples challenge. A chorus of cheers erupted across the terrace. I immediately became suspicious. Every couple will receive a list of questions, he continued. The pair with the most matching answers wins a complimentary sunset boat tour tomorrow morning. I slowly turned toward Lucas. Please tell me you know my favorite movie. He smiled with complete confidence. I know your favorite pizza topping, your coffee order, the name of your childhood dog, and that you still cannot watch animated movies without crying. I blinked at him. How do you know all that? His expression softened in a way I could not quite understand. Before he could answer, the host placed a clipboard in front of us and cheerfully announced, "Our first couple is Lucas and Ethan." Hundreds of curious eyes turned in our direction as Lucas quietly reached for my hand beneath the table, and for the first time all evening, I realized he was just as nervous as I was. The applause that followed our names felt much louder than it probably was. Lucas and I stood together beneath a canopy of warm lights while one of the bridesmaids handed us a small whiteboard and a marker. "Do not overthink it," she said with a grin. "Just write your answers and reveal them together." I leaned toward Lucas and whispered, "I am absolutely going to embarrass us." "Not a chance," he replied so quietly only I could hear. "I have faith in you." The first question appeared on a large screen near the dance floor. "What is your partner's favorite comfort food?" I smiled almost immediately and wrote grilled cheese with tomato soup. Lucas scribbled something just as quickly. We turned our boards around at the same time. They matched perfectly. The crowd cheered. "Lucky guess," I whispered. Lucas only smiled. The next question asked which season I loved most. Again, we matched. Then came my favorite weekend activity, visiting used bookstores. Another perfect match. I stared at Lucas in disbelief. "This is getting suspicious," I muttered. "You make me sound like I have been studying." "Have you?" He looked away with an innocent expression that answered absolutely nothing. The audience laughed as another couple argued over favorite ice cream flavors, giving us a brief moment to breathe. Then the host raised another card with an amused smile. "Final question," she announced. "What was the exact moment you realized you were falling in love?" The terrace grew noticeably quieter. Around us, couples smiled, laughed nervously, or immediately started writing. My marker hovered over the board without moving. This was impossible. We were supposed to be pretending. There was no shared story to invent in 10 seconds. I looked toward Lucas, expecting him to laugh the question away, but instead he stared at the blank board in his hands with an expression I had never seen before. It was thoughtful, almost sad. Then he began to write. I panicked and quickly scribbled, "During coffee after work," hoping it sounded believable enough. "Boards up," the host called. I turned mine over first. "Coffee after work." Lucas slowly lifted his board, watching him laugh with my best friend before he ever noticed me. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire world seemed to stop. He looked at his answer, blinked once, and quietly lowered the board as though he had only just realized what he had written. The host laughed warmly, assuming it was part of our imaginary love story. "That is adorable," she said. "Not a match, but definitely romantic." The crowd applauded anyway. I could barely hear them over the sound of my own heartbeat. Lucas cleared his throat and offered an awkward smile. I misunderstood the question. Nobody else seemed to think much of it, but I could not stop replaying those words in my head. Watching him laugh with my best friend before he ever noticed me. My best friend was my brother. The only time Lucas could have watched us together was years before this weekend, long before our fake relationship ever existed. The game ended with another couple winning the boat tour, and everyone gradually returned to their conversations as live music drifted across the terrace. I followed Lucas toward the quieter lakeside path without saying a word. He rested both hands in his pockets and stared at the moonlit water. Finally, I broke the silence. "You did not misunderstand the question, did you?" He let out a slow breath that disappeared into the cool night air. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then, without looking at me, he spoke so softly I almost missed it. "Ethan, there are some lies that are easy to keep until one simple question reminds you how long they have actually been true." Lucas remained quietly beside the lake, his shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath as though he had finally reached the point where pretending required more energy than telling the truth. The music from the terrace drifted across the water, softened by the cool evening breeze, while laughter echoed somewhere behind us. The rest of the wedding continued as if nothing had changed. For me, everything had. I looked at him, searching for the confident man who had convinced me this weekend would be nothing more than an easy favor. Instead, I found someone who suddenly looked exhausted. "Lucas," I said carefully, "what did you mean?" He gave a small smile that never reached his eyes. "I meant I have been lying for longer than this weekend." My heart stumbled. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, sighed, and slipped it back into his pocket without answering. "Ryan wants everyone inside for a toast," he said. "We should go." "Do not do that." He frowned. Do what? Change the subject. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lucas rested both hands on the wooden railing overlooking the lake. The fake relationship stopped feeling fake for me much faster than I expected. I stared at him, unsure whether I had heard him correctly. You are saying? I am saying that asking you to come here was a mistake. The words landed harder than I expected. Because you regret bringing me? No. His answer came immediately. Because every hour I spend with you makes it harder to remember where the acting ends. My thoughts scattered in every direction at once. Part of me wanted to ask the 100 questions racing through my head. Another part wanted to pretend I had imagined the entire conversation. Before either side could win, familiar footsteps approached from behind us. Ryan stopped a few feet away, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider with an easy smile. There you are, he said warmly. Everyone was wondering where the happiest couple disappeared to. Lucas straightened almost instantly, the vulnerable expression disappearing behind the composed smile I had seen all weekend. We just needed some fresh air. Ryan handed each of us a glass before looking between us. You two look good together. His tone was friendly enough, but there was something thoughtful beneath it, as if he were quietly comparing the present to a memory only he understood. Lucas never smiled this much back then. Lucas looked uncomfortable. Ryan, relax, Ryan said with a gentle laugh. I am getting married tomorrow. I promise I am not trying to reopen old chapters. He turned toward me instead. Take good care of him, Ethan. He spends so much time taking care of everyone, else that he forgets people can do the same for him. With that, he excused himself and headed back toward the reception, leaving us alone once more. I watched him disappear into the lights before quietly asking, he seems nice. Lucas nodded. He is. Then why did things end? Lucas looked out across the dark water again. Because sometimes 2 decent people want completely different futures. His answer felt honest, yet incomplete. Before I could ask anything else, another voice called my name from across the terrace. I turned to see my older brother waving enthusiastically from the entrance, having arrived later than expected because of a delayed flight. He hurried over, pulled me into a quick hug, then looked directly at Lucas with the kind of grin only an older brother could wear. About time, he said. I was wondering how long you were both planning to dance around the truth before somebody finally admitted it. My brother looked from me to Lucas and shook his head with the kind of amused disbelief that only an older sibling could manage. Seriously, he asked. You two are still pretending this is complicated? I blinked. What are you talking about? He laughed softly. Ethan, I figured it out years ago. The only people who never seemed to notice were the 2 of you. Lucas rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. This is not the time. Actually, my brother replied. It is probably the perfect time. He folded his arms and looked directly at me. Do you remember your college graduation? I nodded slowly. Lucas drove 6 hours after finishing a business conference, just so he would not miss your ceremony. You thought he was already visiting me. He was not. I could not even make it because my flight was canceled. I turned toward Lucas in surprise. You never told me that. He gave a helpless shrug. It did not matter. It mattered enough for you to spend 12 hours on the road in one day, my brother said. Then there was your first apartment. Who do you think convinced the landlord to hold it for another week until you had enough money for the deposit? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I had always believed the landlord had simply been generous. My brother continued before either of us could interrupt. Every birthday gift that mysteriously matched something on your wish list? Lucas asked me what you wanted months in advance. When you got sick 2 winters ago, who dropped groceries outside your apartment because he knew you would refuse help if he showed up at the door? Memory after memory quietly rearranged itself inside my head. The anonymous care package. The interview suit that had somehow arrived after mine was ruined. The recommendation that had unexpectedly opened professional doors. None of those moments had seemed connected until now. I looked at Lucas, who appeared far more interested in the wooden deck beneath his shoes than meeting my eyes. Why? I asked quietly. He took a long breath before finally answering. Because caring about you was always easy. My brother smiled gently. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment. Then you started your career. Then he thought you deserved someone younger. Then he worried dating your brother's best friend would make family gatherings awkward. Every year there was another excuse. Lucas let out a quiet laugh, filled with more embarrassment than humor. You were not supposed to tell him all of that. Someone had to, my brother replied. You have been protecting everyone else's feelings for so long that you forgot your own matter too. The breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh lake water between us, while the music from the reception drifted softly through the evening air. I stared at Lucas, suddenly realizing that the man standing in front of me was not pretending to hold my hand earlier because of a fake relationship. He had been holding back far more important words for years. So this weekend, I whispered. Lucas finally looked at me. His blue eyes reflected the warm lights hanging across the terrace. The fake boyfriend part was an excuse, he admitted. I really did need someone to come with me. But the truth is, the only person I wanted beside me was you. I thought if we spent 3 days together, I could finally convince myself to let go if you did not feel the same. Instead, every hour made me realize I never wanted to pretend again. Just then the wedding coordinator hurried onto the terrace with an apologetic smile. Lucas, Ethan, we need every couple for the rehearsal dance in 5 minutes. Please head to the ballroom. Lucas looked at me uncertainly, no longer confident, no longer hiding behind carefully chosen words. For the first time since this weekend began, the next move was entirely mine. For a second I forgot there were dozens of people waiting inside the ballroom. The only thing I could focus on was Lucas standing in front of me, looking more uncertain than I had ever seen him. This was the same man who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without breaking a sweat, yet now he looked almost nervous enough to apologize for telling the truth. I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. You really picked the most complicated way possible to tell someone you like them. Lucas let out a quiet laugh, relief mixing with embarrassment. I know. It sounded much smarter in my head. It usually does. We shared a brief moment of comfortable silence before I held out my hand toward him. Come on. We are making everyone wait. He looked at my hand, then back at me. Are you sure? No, I admitted honestly. I am sure about one thing, though. What is that? I do not want to spend the rest of this weekend pretending I do not feel anything every time you smile at me. His expression softened in a way that made every carefully built wall around my heart quietly disappear. He slipped his hand into mine, and for the first time since arriving at the resort, the gesture no longer felt like part of a performance. We walked into the ballroom together, where elegant chandeliers filled the room with warm light while the wedding party gathered near the polished dance floor. The wedding coordinator clapped happily when she spotted us. Perfect timing. Every couple needs to practice entering together before tomorrow's ceremony. Soft instrumental music began to play as each pair lined up. Lucas and I found ourselves standing near the center of the room. Just follow my lead, he whispered. I smiled. You keep saying that. Because you keep looking like you are about to run away. I have considered it at least 6 times today. He laughed quietly, and the sound settled every remaining nerve inside me. The coordinator demonstrated a simple entrance followed by a slow dance across the floor. Nothing complicated, just enough movement to help photographers plan tomorrow's shots. When our turn came, Lucas rested one hand lightly against my shoulder while I placed mine near his arm. The distance between us felt natural now, free from the awkwardness that had followed us since the drive to Vermont. We moved slowly across the floor while conversations continued around us. You know, I said softly, there is something I never told you either. Lucas looked curious. What is that? I agreed to this weekend after pretending to think about it for almost 10 seconds. He smiled. I noticed. The truth is, I would probably have said yes before you finished asking. His eyes searched mine as though making sure I was serious. Why? I laughed at myself. Because I have had a ridiculous crush on my brother's best friend for longer than I care to admit. Lucas actually stopped walking for half a second before remembering everyone was watching. You are kidding. I wish I were. Ethan, looks like we were both pretending for years. A warm laugh escaped him, lighter than any I had heard all weekend. Around us, guests smiled at what they assumed was another sweet moment between an established couple. Only we knew that our imaginary relationship had quietly disappeared somewhere between the lakeside conversation and the middle of a rehearsal dance. As the music ended, the room filled with applause. Ryan stepped onto the small stage to thank everyone for coming before raising his glass with a genuine smile. His eyes briefly met Lucas's, then shifted to me. There was no resentment there, only quiet understanding. Tomorrow, he said, is about celebrating the people brave enough to choose the future they truly want. Lucas squeezed my hand gently beneath the applause, and this time neither of us let go. The wedding morning arrived wrapped in golden sunlight spilling across the lake, turning the quiet water into a mirror that reflected the bright blue sky. I woke before my alarm, lying still for a moment as I listened to birds singing somewhere beyond the balcony doors. For the first time since agreeing to this trip, my thoughts were calm instead of tangled. Lucas was already awake, standing outside with a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked over his shoulder when he heard the door slide open and smiled in that familiar, effortless way that no longer made me wonder whether it meant anything. Now I knew exactly what it meant. "Good morning," he said. "Morning." He held out the second mug he had apparently prepared for me without asking. "Still take 2 sugars?" I accepted it with a quiet laugh. "You really do remember everything. Only the things that matter." We stood side by side watching the morning mist slowly lift from the lake. There was no pressure to fill the silence anymore. Somehow it had become the most comfortable conversation we had ever shared. The ceremony itself was beautiful. White flowers lined the aisle, soft music drifted through the trees, and every guest seemed to smile a little wider as Ryan and his partner exchanged heartfelt vows beneath the wooden arbor overlooking the water. When the officiant spoke about choosing honesty over fear and partnership over uncertainty, I caught Lucas glancing toward me. I smiled back without hesitation. During the reception, my brother found us near the dessert table and grinned so broadly that I knew exactly what was coming. "So," he asked, "are we still calling this fake?" Lucas looked at me instead of answering. I reached for his hand in full view of everyone around us. "Not anymore." My brother threw both hands into the air. "Finally, I was beginning to think I would have to trap you two in another wedding." Even Ryan laughed when he overheard the comment while passing by with a plate of cake. He stopped beside us and offered Lucas a warm handshake before turning to me. "Take care of him," he said sincerely. "He deserves someone who makes him laugh this much." I nodded. "I plan to." Ryan smiled with genuine happiness before rejoining his new spouse on the dance floor, and I realized something quietly important. Sometimes people leave your life not because they were the wrong chapter, but because they were never meant to be the final one. Later that evening, after the last song had played and the guests slowly drifted back toward the lodge, Lucas and I returned to the same lakeside path, where everything had finally become honest. The string lights reflected across the water just as they had the night before, but the air somehow felt lighter. Lucas stopped walking and faced me. "I asked you to come here because I thought pretending might help me move on if you did not feel the same." He smiled softly. "Instead, you gave me the courage to stop pretending altogether." I squeezed his hand gently. "Funny. I came here thinking I was helping you survive an awkward weekend. And what happened instead?" I looked around at the quiet lake, the glowing lights, and the place where one simple favor had completely changed both our lives. Then I looked back at him. Instead, I found the person I should have stopped pretending with a long time ago. 1 year later, we returned to the same resort, this time by choice instead of obligation. We walked the same lakeside path, laughed about the tiny suite with one bed, and thanked Ryan and his husband for inviting us back to celebrate their first anniversary. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Lucas reached into his jacket pocket and smiled with that same nervous expression I had seen on the first night by the lake. "No pretending this time," he said quietly. "Ethan Brooks, will you keep choosing me long after every wedding is over?" I smiled before he could finish another sentence. "Yes, every single day."